yellow. So a couple of you asked for a video how to do this so you can play it back slowly. So I'm going to make a card initially, just the initial implementation of said card, step by step. Get the workflow down. If you want to be a web developer, GitHub is your lifeblood. I can't teach you every aspect of it. VS Code, look up tutorials. Lit Element is used by hundreds of companies. People have written about it. Find examples. You have to dig this stuff up. There will not be happy-go-lucky, perfectly made videos cut end to end for exactly what you need, other than this one. So what we're going to do, we're going to make this card using Lit. I'm going to do it a little differently because this is the way I think of the problem space. So yes, we're going to use OpenWC. And in the guide, it says quick start is this command. Right? So you're not actually installing anything initially with this. This init command is basically running a shortcut command that's off from npm. So I am going to open up terminal. I believe it says to make a GitHub repo and pull it down locally. We can do that. So let's make a GitHub repo. Go to github.com. All right, and then I'm going to make a new repo, not from a template. This will be under my username, and we'll just call this the Drew card. You know who it's going to be about. It's Drew. So, all right, Drew card, and that's it. Nothing in it. It's public. I'm not putting anything in this repo to start because OpenWC is going to do all the hard work. So I'm going to create this repo, which is now empty. I highly recommend you set up your SSH keys. I've given out information on how to do this with GitHub. Get comfortable with the command line, especially because with a blank repo, it literally just tells you copy and paste this stuff, and you're a good part of the way there initially. So I've got my terminal window open here. I need to open a window that says ATTIC storage on the side. Okay, so now I'm going into my directory. Right now, by default, I'm at tilde, this little thing. Tilde implies user directory. If you have a C:\/ users, your name, cool. This is pretty much the same thing here. In fact, if I type pwd, it'll tell me I'm in the home directory here. Now, there's going to be some command differences between Windows and Linux and OS X, although OS X and Linux will be very similar. But I'm going to change directory into the place where I store all of my stuff. Now, I don't type very many keys because there's autocompletes across the whole terminal. So we're trying to form a mental model in our head as to where we're going. So I keep all of my Git stuff in documents. I type the letter G and hit tab. It will autocomplete Git if it's the only thing named with a G. Then Git my username, BTO Pro. So if I type L or LS space -LAS, or for you Windows people, DIR, although that won't give me the right thing. Oh yeah, it did actually seem to give it to me there. Okay, so this is going to give us a listing of what's in this directory with some additional details of permissions and things. Not going to get into that right now. But it says to get this repo started. This is just making a file initially. So I need to do this in the directory I want this to exist in. So for this example, I'm going to do a git clone of this instead of this brand new repo or augmenting an existing, right? So I'm going to take this and I want to do SSH. If you do HTTPS, you will not be able to push your code back. You'll be able to clone it and work on it, but you won't be able to get it back up to GitHub. So SSH, read the article on SSH key binding. If you are using the GitHub desktop client, it is doing all of these things for you. The GUI is just running these commands. So git clone, thing in question. And yes, I will clone nothing. It says you appear to have cloned an empty repository. So if I list it, we'll see there's Drew card there. dir, Drew card. So instead of going into Drew card, this is where I'm going to run my OpenWC command. Copy, paste. It is important that I then name it the same thing as Drew-card. This will then write the files into that folder. So I'm going to scaffold a new project. It is going to be an application. I do not want to turn on linting, but I'm going to hit spacebar, spacebar, spacebar. Testing, demoing, building. These things are important, especially building. We'll hopefully get into testing and demoing. Linting, we're not going to get into for now. If you've turned it on, I have a way in the docs to disable it. It's effectively giving you feedback and won't let you commit busted code. Now that sounds great, and it is, but when you're initially getting started, it's going to be complaining about stuff like, yeah, you put 2 spaces on this line. It's supposed to be 4. So let's leave that off for now. And I hit enter. Do you want TypeScript? No. Tag name is the same as the other one. So Drew-card. Oops. And in the case of a web component, you must have a hyphen in it. It cannot start with a number. It has to be all lowercase, and it has to have a hyphen somewhere in the name of the tag. This is the specification for HTML web components. So it's going to say, hey, do you want to write all this stuff to disk? So this is what it's about to do. It's about to go into DrewCard and write all these files for me. Yes. Do you want to install dependencies? You could say yes. I'm going to say no. Okay. At the end, it says, all you need to do is go into this directory. So cd Drew. Now, I didn't install it, so I need to do npm install. It's the exact same thing as what it would have done there a second ago. So I've got DrewCard. While that is installing, I have a plugin called ohmyzsh, or zsh, there we go, which is ohmyz.sh. You don't have to install this, but if you want your terminal to be a little easier to work with, it's got nice plugins. It does things like puts this X and says what the Git branch you're on is. It certainly makes working with terminal a lot nicer. It does some autocompletes and other little shortcuts that aren't normal syntax, like I could do 3 dots to go back 2 levels instead of 1. So I have run npm install, which now if I list everything, the only thing npm install does is it makes this folder, and it will make a lock file or update a lock file if one doesn't exist. Now, a couple of you I know have opened the lock file. I'm going to open up VS Code now because we're almost at that stage. All right, so I've got VS Code. I'm going to open the folder instead of using a shortcut. It's in Documents, Git, BTO Pro, DrewCard. So now I have those files updated and in place, and I've got it installed, and I'm looking at it in this window. Now I'm going to split the screen into 2 parts here. Let's close that. Split the screen into 2 parts. I've got DrewCard here. Okay. I'm going to leave that behind, and we'll try and just run the commands from here. So I'm at the correct directory location. I hit terminal, new terminal. This is equivalent to this frame right here. It's the exact same thing. It's just put me there. So I can do pwd and see I'm in that location. So I'm going to run npm start. Now there is a web server running here, right? And it tells you the paths. It tells you where it served it from. And you should just see a dumb spinny thing to start. So I'm going to scale this a little bit, yeah, because I don't care about that as much. I have a huge screen. It will make me smaller, right? So you've got index.html, which is implementing Drew-card. Drew card is in an HTML document. There's some very minor styling, right? So just to prove that if I hit save, it updates. So whenever I hit save, it updates. I do Control S for save. Shortcuts will save you a lot of time. The whole advantage of web components is this. Paste my Drew card endlessly, and all of the stuff that makes up a Drew card just works. I can right click on an element, and I can see that Drew card has a shadow root. So all the stuff internal to that file and the render method on that class is going to show up here. And so it's HTML that is representative of other HTML tags in this case. So it's by reference. So I can update the tag, and anywhere the tag is implemented just changes to be that thing. Now, I can also inspect and walk through and see the HTML just like I could before. And I'm going to see some fancy little things here. We'll get into it at a later point in time. But this is some lit placeholders. So this is not vanilla, but it's pretty darn close. So I'll go through the parts that are not vanilla throughout the semester. But this is pretty darn close to vanilla while still having a nice happy-go-lucky user experience. So on the regular, if you say this is broken, it's not working, I'm checking the terminal here to see if it's throwing errors, or I'm right-clicking and hitting inspect, and I'm looking at console to see if there are errors. There is the whole development experience right here. There is no magic as to it's not working. It's right there. So I will reduce the number of Drew cards to 3. Save, it reloads. Okay. Drew card, it says, is pulled in from src/drew-card.js. Now, I could control click this and it would take me there, or go over on the side, src. And so unpacking what this has for us, it imports things from Lit. So there's some magic on the back end, because if we look, it says this is located in node modules/lit/index. Node tooling, the thing when I run npm start, the big thing that's going to do in this case is effectively resolve these to their real location. Because if I'm developing with you all and we're working on something together, it's of no use to me to know that you actually have this located here, but someone else has it located here, and maybe the name of that project changes. So it's about inferring where the code is and what we want, the intentionality of it. We want to pull lit element HTML and CSS, which are classes and objects, or sorry, classes and functions from this lit file. I could follow it, and you will start to get confused because it gets into a mix of TypeScript and non-TypeScript as to where this stuff is and why it's showing up here. So we're following examples to know I can pull these 3 things in and use them in my code now. So the other important thing with this specifically is it's creating a new URL that links to the spinning OpenWC logo. Now, this is a little fancy. We can get into why that's required at a later point in time. You can't just do like /assets/open-WC logo. Mostly because, again, we don't know where this is going to be used. So this import.meta.url works with this to say, create a variable that looks at the current directory, right? So no matter where this is, because this file could be located anywhere in someone else's file tree when they're using DrewCard. So look where that is, go back a folder, over to assets, and then find the SVG and give me just the resource address for that. So if I went console.log logo, save, over on this side, I can inspect, pull up console, and we'll see that points to localhost 8000 assets, openwc logo.svg. That is not going to be the case when it's actually out in production, right? So this gives us a nice relative path to things. Think of it like when you're navigating folder trees and you type cd ... right? And you move around relative to other things. Oh, that coffee's so good today. I need coffee. Highly recommend. I need a lot of water too. All right. So, a couple of you asked about scoping. I don't know when things are global in scope, when they're within a method, when they're within a class. Got it. So, if I'm out in this index HTML and I wrote just a generic script tag like this, I could write console.log cool, or I could do var cool equals whatever. And I could do console.log cool as far as the variable versus the string. Okay. Inspect console. I see cool, whatever. Also note that this code ran later. The reason I know it ran later is that it actually printed it out to the screen at a later point in time. So even though script type module is here, things that are not a script type module, this is just like global scope JavaScript. You can write whatever you want in there because it's an HTML tag. This is going to run first. Now, you could have cool out here and instead do something like window.cool equals whatever, save, right? And this places it on the window object. The whole screen is an object in this case. We're going back a little bit towards Java land. So I could clean this up, write it this way. Okay, so we got window.cool, and it says whatever. And now inside of DrewCard, because it's running after that, I can also then console.log window.cool and get that same value. Now, there's a lot of reasons why not to do this, in part for modular architecture's sake. Nothing is guaranteeing that window.cool exists. So if you want to break your JavaScript real quick, I can go back up to the top, delete that global variable, right? Because it's in the application level as opposed to the individual component we're working on. And hit save, right? It's undefined. Now, if it was a nested object, like window.cool.stuff, it actually is going to break the execution. So the reason we can't just assume global variables are there, and in the case of JavaScript, global in this case is things that are attached to window, is if it's not there, and then I reference it here, I could break the execution of my entire program. And when we have modular JavaScript, in this case, script type module, there cannot be a baseline error in any of these files or the whole chain breaks. It's called a module because it's a thing, goes to a thing, goes to a thing, goes to a thing, and then clicks it all together, and then you see it work. So I'm going to take out both of these console logs, but this is still global scope because it's not within a class, right? So even if I delete this stuff, this custom elements.define, that is effectively saying window.custom elements.define. If there's a variable just sitting there that's magically defined, but it has nothing that's ever referenced it, that means it's on the window of the browser itself. So we've got DrewCard here, which is their default thing. I'm going to hit save so we get our little spinny logo back. Some of you went and just modified this to put your own styles on there. What I would do instead is I delete all this. So let's delete all of that. Another interesting thing with VS Code, if you saw this just went dark, and then if I go back, it lights up. And the reason it did that is because VS Code has detected I'm no longer using those items, and so I could potentially delete that dependency. Just a fun little thing. Also, if I, for example, didn't use the CSS one, so let's get rid of just the styles, it'll just drop the font color on CSS so I know, oh, you're not actually using this. So that's true of anything. It has nothing to do with lit in this case. It's just niceness of VS Code. Now, if you spun up your browser and you've got your VS Code window here, and it doesn't look like this necessarily, you want some extensions. So I have the lit-html extension and the lit-plugin extension. There's also some other ones I got on here. CodeSnap is really nice. Fix JSON helps fix JSON blobs automatically. YAML, right? There's all kind of really nice syntax highlighting and things. But get these two plugins. This is going to give you nice HTML and CSS based styling and highlighting, even though we're inside one file. Now, a couple people have mentioned in the list of things that they don't get is why in these things we're going to, am I not using a whatever.html and a whatever.css? I'm actually seeing it all in one place. And the reason for that is this is where the modern web has gone. I'm going to give you a link as far as some extended reading to do. It might bore you to tears, but it's good for context to understand where the web has been, which was in .css and .html and .js files standalone, to where the reactification has gone. So all these component architectures, we played with 3 of them, are built on the premise that you're not going to do anything useful with just CSS or just HTML or just JavaScript alone anymore. You're going to combine the 3 to make a modular component so we can stack these things together. So I am actually going to just clear everything out of here, but we've got properties, which are things that we are programming into our element that we care about whether or not they change. We've got styles, right? So that's where our CSS goes. We've got the constructor, which is our default values and saying, hey, this object exists at all. Then we've got render, which is going to be our HTML guts that we print out to the page. And then at the bottom, we've got the thing that says, every time you see this tag name, run this class. So every time this tag exists on the page, it's going to render this HTML using these default values and styling it to look like this. The only magical selector at the moment is this :host, which is like saying, hey, apply this stuff to me. So these are your defaults. Think of this as when there's a bold tag, somewhere deep in the browser, there's going to be :host, font, -weight, bold. And that's all that one would have. It's actually display inline block, I believe, as well. So I'm going to delete all of this. We'll make it from 0 here. So go back to browser. Make this a little bit bigger for the moment. I'm going to go to the Lit tutorial. We'll go to Intro to Lit. Now, make sure that you've got this set to JavaScript instead of TypeScript. So we can see there's export class, whatever extends lit element. And then it's got properties. It's got a version that's set. So I'm actually going to copy theirs because this is even more simplistic than the other one. Paste it in, save. And now we currently don't have anything in DrewCard. Okay. So now I go to console and I see reference error. DrewCard is not defined. So this is where that syntax highlighting can really help us out. So DrewCard is not in green here. It should be in green. It should say class DrewCard, right? And the reason that it's gone is because I don't have DrewCard anymore. It's the definition. So thinking back to Java land, class, whatever, extends something else. And the something else in this case is lit element. Imagine somewhere deep down the trail, there is actually something that says this. And this is the magic of web components. There's HTML element is built into the browser as a registered class that all of the vendors have agreed upon. Then up from that, lit element is extending HTML element. As a result, any web component library that extends HTML element is compatible with any other component library. React, Angular, and Vue do not have that capability. Vue can simulate that capability, so I don't hate Vue that much. Angular has taken more of an approach of, well, we're by Google and Lit is by Google, so we'll just kind of start dialing back our conventions and leaning more on Lit to do these things that we were originally doing. And React has basically said, we don't care about the web. I don't know. They haven't entirely, but like they're far behind when it comes to adoption of these core specs. Although you can get plugins that make it work. So I have properties, in this case version, and I'll hit save and it should show up. There we go. So welcome to the Lit tutorial. This is starting code, right? So now I can delete things in render and I'm going to get this working. The key thing that the tutorials should make note of, and as we'll start to work into our elements, is this relationship. So I said, what is vanilla and what is HTML? I'm actually going to write CSS as well. So it's static get styles, return CSS, and then we colon host font size 2ems. Okay, so that is the default, which then can easily be overridden up above that I'm applying here. I'm actually going to give this a border for absolute no reason. 1 pixel solid blue, and let's say display block. Okay, now if I said display inline block, right, we see the difference in the box that shows up there. I could then say like max width 100 pixels or something, right? And they start to smash together. So it's all different ways you can mess with the box model to achieve this. But fundamentally, your baseline that we're going to get is going to have something that has properties. We're going to have styles. We're going to have the default values. And then we're going to render out this information. Now, the magic of what Lit is providing is pretty much wrapped up in conventions. So you have the HTML call. That is not built into the browser. That's supplied by Lit, which is saying decorate this information. I'll show you an example at a later point in time, but this is actually doing something called template literals, and I can see the little doc pop up there about what template literals are. But whenever you make a backtick, you can actually write variables inside of that information. So, for example, if I did const stuff equals things, I could then have this version be I love stuff. Okay, and then see I did stuff, so it highlighted. Hit save, and I get this is the I love things code, okay, because it's version. So this is vanilla, that I can print a variable in here. What is not vanilla is this aspect. So I'm printing HTML and then I'm putting a variable right there. Now I could just copy this variable, paste it twice, and then I get the same variable twice. But what Lit is providing us is this. So if I were to take this value, in this case it says version, and we're going to add some to this. This shows up in some of the docs associated with it. I'm actually going to write this differently because I don't like writing it that way. So I do static get properties, return, and then version. So version is type string. This tells Lit, handle this like it's a string. You could do it with numbers or with booleans or with arrays later on. Then I'm going to say reflect true. Get rid of this first one. Okay, so when I hit save, initially there will be no difference. But now when I inspect, what reflect true gives us is this. So Drew-card has a variable called version, which is a string, and its value is this. So here's what Lit is giving us that is on top of a more or less vanilla type of platform, but this is why people are starting to adopt it in droves. Is that. So when you, the whole reason React is called React is that you have data reactivity, that when you update the underlying data model, it updates it visually in this case. Now, when I have version and I modify, right, this to be anything, what Lit is doing is using template literal syntax, which is those backticks. It's left an HTML comment. And it's done this on purpose because with this HTML comment, it now has a direct reference that pairs this variable updating to the thing right after this. So it's a little weird, but I could do store as global variable, which is a good way of doing some debugging and messing with stuff. So let me show that first with Drew-card. So nice thing in the inspector, when I hover over something, you see the exact thing over in the other column, right? So let's right-click Drew-card. I'm going to do store as global variable. And I see this relationship down here, and I can expand it and dig into the individual piece of it. But now this is giving me temp1 as a variable. So now if I do temp1, I can do dot version and it's going to actually tell me about the underlying data model, right? So imagine this is the same as doing like document.query selector Drew card. It's just done that when I've set this as a temporary value. So I can also change this. So I can do version equals, and when I update the data model, it updates the resulting HTML, which Lit notices and updates the place here associated with it. And why people have adopted Lit in droves and will continue to. I mean, like, I think this is pretty darn near future proof. And I have never said that about anything in JavaScript ever. This convention is pretty close to future proof, or as close as we can get, or it's at least so small that it's not that big a deal, because so much of the work you're doing at this point is vanilla that swapping out this class isn't a huge deal. The reason I know this is a thing is we actually started all of our elements in a different library called Polymer. And Polymer's stated goal was to fade away as the browsers got better. It was supposed to be the polymer, like the glue that kind of went between the conventions people wanted and where the browser was at that time. And then when we actually went and refactored, I could change an element from Polymer to Lit. And I don't know, most of them I did in under half an hour. And everything just worked, TM. So the reason Lit is so powerful is this. When you have the template literals, it leaves a placeholder, and that placeholder means there's a variable as the next item. So if we right click on the placeholder, which is an HTML comment, and stores global, that is actually a node, DOM node, in the page. So I could do temp2 dot parent node and know that there's a paragraph above it, right? So because of that, that means I can do next element, next sibling, and see it says there's a text node next to me. So because you've told Lit, hey, this is a string, because you've said it's a string, Lit is able to go, whenever this variable updates, because it's paying attention to it because you put it in properties, when that variable gets updated, it notices it, it targets this tag and says, hey, the thing right after it that's associated with it, text content is the variable, text content, right? So make the text content equal stuff. That is effectively what's happening when I write stuff, right? And you can see it actually flash and it updates those items. So that little teeny tiny piece of capability is incredibly powerful as far as what you can do when you have that level of data reactivity between a property being defined and the HTML updating. This is blindingly fast at scale because of how small these references are. It just leaves this one little tiny node here, and then it's able to modify the variable after it. It's not to say you can't make things slow or get into infinite loops with Lit, but this destroys virtual DOM approaches, which would rebuild the entire thing and then paste it back in, because it's literally updating the little tiny thing next to where it should be. So let's make my Drew card under this. Guys, I've had a lot of setup there. So I've got my card laying around with Drew, right? I'm going to take the HTML. My initial step is I'm just going to paste my HTML in. Save, all right? Okay, so now I've got Drew Doughty. And that part just works because it's a summary and details tag. This is claiming that I don't have all of the HTML wrapped appropriately. That's cool. So let's see what else is in there. Let's get our styles then. So CodePen, CSS, I'm going to just copy all the styles. And then the styles I'm going to put in here. Back to Drew. All right. He's already looking pretty legit. Legit Drew Doughty. So then I've got my JavaScript selectors. Now, when we go to do our JavaScript selectors, we are going to have to rewrite these for them to be usable. And it's laughing at me. Where's that onload? That does the haha. Forget where the haha is. It's somewhere in this code. Got to get rid of the haha. Alert. Oh, I saw alert. Haha, a second ago. Alert. There we go. No, stop doing that. All right, save. At least now my code pen will stop laughing at us. Okay. So we've got Drew on there. He exists. The reason that I'm going to need to rewrite these, and I'm not going to just totally do all of them right now. The reason I'm going to need to rewrite these in the way it's currently done is that all this stuff was built prior to Shadow DOM scoping. So when I go back to Drew card, right, whoops, I don't want to say it. I've got multiple cards, so we've got down the whole component architecture notion. That's cool. Let's see what else is going on here. All right, I've got a div on that one, details on that one. Details looks to be a little off. Okay, space details there. I've got this div to there, right? And I've got container to there, and I'm missing a div. Okay. All right, so take div, tab that in. You don't have to space everything, but I highly recommend it. You tab this stuff out. VS Code will do this nice little collapse thing so you can realize where you are, right? And you can find those tags and open and close them. Another nice thing here, right? And some of the other libraries we played or frameworks we played with, if I was missing that div, whole thing's broken. In this case, Lit was able to recover that for us, so it would at least be functional. Now, it's in the directions to start to do this, but I'm going to start hollowing these capabilities out. So I'm going to take my buttons, and I want to make a card, just a card, right? So we want things to be in an atomic design pattern. And when we think atomically, I can actually Google instead of hitting Bing there, atomic design, there we go, book by Brad Frost. Make you go get the book, but to show very basic thing here is the idea that we have a periodic table of elements in our head, right? We've got atoms, and atoms are the smallest form of matter. In this case, our tags, right? So this is how we start to build design systems and be in a design thinking, systems thinking sort of mindset here. So I've got atoms, and if I combined a whole bunch of little tiny things, I could get a molecule. And if I combine a whole bunch of those, I could get an organism, and a bunch of organisms form a template, and a bunch of templates form a whole page. So then it gives examples of these, right? Some atoms could be like the label, the styling of just the label, and then the input and the button. But then a molecule is those three things used together. And then going up from there, we might use those three things together in a larger context, right? And we can see these across all kind of different sites. So Brad Frost does a great job of explaining this. I mean, he pretty much coined this concept. So I want you to be thinking in this way, in how can we repurpose this? Now, I've gotten questions before of, well, when have I made enough? When do I know it's small enough? In the case of a card, we're just going to say it's a card. But anytime you have sufficiently complex HTML that has to do a certain thing, particularly if JavaScript and CSS get involved, it's probably a component. Another idea is if you can name the thing, it's a component. So thinking in that regard, if I have my buttons inside this card, it's not actually part of the card. So visually, what is the card? Well, it's Drew with his career stats in that he won a Stanley Cup over the New York Rangers in 2014, and the New York Rangers did not win the Stanley Cup in 2014, and they did not win in 2014. So that is the actual design asset. That's the thing that is the component, the Drew card. So I'm going to take my buttons out. I'm not bringing in my JavaScript associated with it. Okay. And then I'm going to go to index, and I'm going to put those in my demo of how this card can be leveraged. So at the body level, my buttons, I'm going to take out some of my Drew cards. Right, so I've got my buttons, but my buttons are separate from the Drew card. I should not be stamping more and more buttons down every time that I go to do this. So now I can take my code pen, and copy just the default of what I had there. And now I'm going to put my I'm going to put my JavaScript for this at the bottom here. Well, let's close our code pen. I don't need that to keep laughing at me. Let's save. Look at Drew. All right, Drew, that resizes, okay. If I hit duplicate, nothing happens. Change, delete, toggle, nothing happens. What is going on here? Right, I get error messages. So the very first error message, cannot read properties of null. Go and look, and it says document.querySelector wrapper. Wrapper is not queryable anymore. So if we look in my original code, right, I've got even CSS styling on something called .wrapper. Right, and wrapper moves, it changes based on screen real estate. But I've got div class wrapper. I can no longer query that because of the shadow root. And if I right click, inspect Drew, I can see wrapper is there. But whenever you see this shadow root, notice it's collapsed by default here. That is a boundary in which you cannot query through in a normal sense. So if I said document.querySelector, right, and I do .wrapper, nothing's coming up. Now, you can chain query selectors together, and I'm not telling you to write these, but just for fun, I can do a query selector that targets Drew-card. Okay, so now I'm targeting the object as opposed to some magical class that we're interpreting to go, oh, that's the wrapper. But now that I've queried that, the shadow root is an actual property on that element. And then I could query that. And in there, I could do .wrapper and pull out that wrapper. Now, I know at least a few people got to this level where they got something like this to work. And so if it's not the toggle, well, yeah, what's querying the wrapper? Oh, well, let's get rid of my haha, right? Because that's not going to do anything. But let's say we click on the button. Oh, we're not the toggle. Yeah, we could do it on toggle, sure. But let's do query selector, Drew card, shadow root, right? Let's replace. Actually, I could leave the button toggle thing there, right? So you might think you could just do this. Save. It cannot read properties of null. What is that? And clicking this error, it shows me exactly where it is. Sometimes you can do, if you expand this, you'll get a stack trace and it'll show you where the error came from. But with what we're doing initially, we're not going to have stuff like that. So it's saying that this doesn't exist. Cannot read properties of null, reading query selector. And if I go and click the exact thing, it shows my cursor, right? Put the cursor right there, right there. Now, the reason for this is shadow root isn't run until JavaScript is fully finished running. As our console logs at the beginning demonstrated, script type module will not run until after all the rest of JavaScript is run. Then it has to find everything, then it runs. So this is a little silly, but for about a microsecond, this doesn't exist. So what we want to do, we want to query select our buttons, right? And when we click on the button, we're not doing this details parent node stuff because that doesn't exist, right? We've got a query selector on summary in my original example. That doesn't exist. So I'm going to pull this code inside of here. So it's in the click handler. We're going to do details dot, and we've got document query selector summary. That we can replace with our shadow root query selector stuff. So I've got query selector, Drew card, dot shadow root, query selector. And in this case, it's going to be the details element. There's no errors because the event listeners, right, are document query selectors. It's not directly querying Drew card. And this is on toggle, right? Okay, toggle didn't do anything. The toggle button, that's the toggle stats button. Details, let's look down in details. Details, class details, okay. All right, so it's called details. Now let's look at soul.log details. Okay, so let's hit toggle stats. Didn't throw an error. So it is finding the details item. But my original code had get and actually was set to the summary. It wasn't set to details. So let's take these off. So if we get an attribute of open, remove it. Otherwise, set it to open. All right, now we're able to toggle those stats because we're query selecting the card, and then we're going down in the shadow root and we're query selecting the thing in question. And if this gotcha, congratulations, you're like every 10-year plus developer in the industry. This stuff pisses people off that have been in the industry a long time. They are used to writing global scoped document.query selector and then a million CSS selections to get the exact thing in question. This is part of why everyone moved to things like React and Angular, was so we could get some scoping to contain what that functionality is. So shadow root is built into the specification. You can query select and find things through it, but it is intentionally blocking you from initially accessing that information. So this is going to force scoping. Now, duplicate, pretty stinking easy. Okay. I don't have to do all this crazy getting the wrapper part, right? I can just clone the thing in question. And in this case, I don't even need to do true on that because I know previously true says, hey, get all the children in here. There are no children in it. It's the shadow now. There's a million Drews, right? So it's simplified that, and it's going to look the same regardless. So let's see, we've got modifying the title, right? And this one, we could do a couple different ways. Probably save this one for class. We could go in and modify the inner HTML or the inner text of this wrapper in H3, right? And I could grab this and basically just copy querying Drew and the shadow root and replacing that right there. So we change the name, we target it. Or we could update a property and allow Lit to update this for us. So the last one here is delete, right? And so now, again, instead of this wrapper last child thing, we're going to have query selecting Drew. And I can still actually use my .wrapper, right? So we can make sure that we don't actually delete Drew in this case, right? So are you sure? Well, let's see if there was an error. Inspect, console, cannot read properties of null, reading remove. Okay, so query selector, Drew card, last child. Okay. So what was this before? It was .wrapper. All right. So are you sure you want to delete Drew? And then we get rid of the last Drew card. All right, but it's not actually the last Drew card, is it? So if we right click, we see there's Drew card. All right, so last child is, last child is within this selection here, right? So let's do, it's not going to be Drew card. It means I have to wrap where the Drew cards exist. So I'm going to say div, and I'll give this an ID, and we'll call it container. And this is, we'll call it app, because this is a lot more like the way these apps, or air quotes, app. But we've got an app, and we're doing everything within the app here. Okay, so then instead of document.body, right, instead of appending to clone an item, we're actually going to get that ID. So we're going to do document.query selector, #app, and we're going to append the clones into that. So that way, if I want last child, actually the children of our app element. So if I do duplicate, that'll also work. If I do delete, you sure? Cannot read properties of null. It does not like that last child selector there. Interesting. Okay, let's do. Okay. Really? Ah, there we go. I needed a space. Probably just needed a space before as well. Oops. Right, so that appears that it's going to actually select the right one there. So, all right, so let's make sure there's a space there. Okay. Save, delete, oops, delete. You can't delete Drew. Duplicate, delete. Yay, it'll get rid of that one. So now you duplicate a bunch, delete them. On confirmation, confirmation. Cool. Okay. So now we've got Drew. We can do these different operations to him, toggle this, change his name, duplicate, all the things of the previous one, but I've re-scoped them to work this way, right? So I want you to get your stuff into the global scope here, right? Your index HTML. We get our buttons there. We've got our app in question. But then I also want you to be able to get your CSS and HTML, and in this case I got my dumb Drew image, into here. Now, I could make this into just an actual image. I'm going to save this image of Drew. All right, we'll call this Drew JPG. Go to Git, BTO Pro, Drew card, assets, save. All right, so now there's drew.jpg, and if I open it, right, we've got Drew. Okay. And then let's take out all this base 64 nonsense. Oh my, there's a lot of copy and paste incorrectly here. Holy, base 64. Okay. All the way down to there. Save. All right, Drew goes away because he's empty. Cool. Okay. Now, in order to get Drew to work, I'm going to bring back that variable from before. Do const Drew equals new URL. The path to URL is relative to this file, so / assets / drew.jpg, comma import.meta.url ref. All right, and then I'm going to print a variable there, which will be a reference to Drew. So if that looked weird or like you didn't get why that just worked, go back to towards the beginning of the video before I gutted out the little OpenWC logo. So this is a path relative to the current file, which is what this syntax is saying, which is going to give me Drew as a variable. And then because Lit uses HTML template literals here, I can update the source and just point to Drew in that case. All right, so this will be the sort of initial step of refactoring that I'm expecting you to do here. Now, one other part of this is going to be variables. So I want Drew Doughty and ice hockey defenseman to be variable. So the way I do that is it's not properties version here. I'm going to do, let's say name, comma, and then position. So I don't need to do the reflect, but I'm going to do position as a string here. And the reason, again, thinking back to our atomic design, I don't really want a Drew card. Now, I have named my repo Drew card, I know, but that normally it might be like hockey card or hockey player or player card or sport card, something like that in the abstract. And then the way I'm implementing it becomes that usage of it. So we're trying to get to that abstract form. Initially, yes, I'm just going to call it Drew card, but then I want you to take your card, and if it's, say, a Pokemon character, it's not Pika-Chu, and it's not Pikachu card, although it could be to start. It's Pokemon card or character card, something like that. And then the way you're implementing character card is what makes it a Pokemon card. So name, I'm gonna get rid of this version nonsense. And I'm gonna say the default name is Drew Doughty, because he's awesome. And I'm gonna do this dot position. And this dot position equals defensive beast. Other possible position is toothless. All right, so I'm setting these on this. And before you ask, this is a reference to this whole class here, Drew card, an instance of Drew card. So I can put any variables I want on this. I could do this dot whatever equals, right? Or this dot things equals, and then make it an object of stuff. I can do whatever I want on this. And it's scoped just to this instance of it. So every new Drew card that comes down, all those variables are there hidden behind the scenes. If, however, I don't define those variables in properties, right? So I don't have whatever defined. It doesn't get the data reactivity that I showed before as to what Lit is providing us. So anytime there's a variable and a name that you want to select for your card in this little API configuration here, we're going to modify the properties, and we're going to say what kind of property it is, right? Whether it's a Boolean, a name, position, whatever. And then we're also going to list a default. All right, so I'll get rid of whatever. And then we're going to implement it in the render method. So I'm going to take out Drew Doughty's name here. I'm going to do this dot name. I'm still going to get Drew Doughty, but now it is reactive. So now it's no longer a Drew Doughty card. Right? Now it can be anything I want, and it will react to that change. So now instead of ice hockey defenseman, I take that out, and I do this dot position. Drew Doughty, defensive beast. Now, even though I didn't reflect position here, reflect is doing is it's making it available up here. So now I do position equals, I can still set that variable even though it wasn't reflected. What reflect does is no matter what the variable is or when it changes, it's going to output it there. My screen went dead for a second there, sorry. So it's going to output it in this place, right? So name equals Drew Doughty. If I got rid of this, right, it's effectively saying Drew Doughty is now set to nothing. If I store Drew Doughty as a global variable, and I do .name, right, we can set it back to stuff. So now, instead of changing name this way, right, input and modify, you notice it didn't actually change name here. And the reason for that is I actually went in and I manipulated this to say, no, this item, it just has this value now. So if we look at our buttons and I find my modified title button, we see that modified title asks for a name. And then as long as we have a name, it query selects a card, goes into the shadow root, finds a wrapper, and modifies the inner text directly. This is unsustainable. If any modification happens to my card structure, this breaks. However, treating it like an API, like we're working with a card, I can do Drew card dot name and just set it to a name. Right? And it still updated it, but it updated the actual underlying variable. So this is part of the power of not necessarily web components. You could do this with the other frameworks, but this is the power of Lit in action here, right? This relating of file to class, class to object in the page, object in the page to thing that I can right click and store as global variable, dot name, right? And modify and get that relationship. So now that I've got this all in place, and I've got it at least to this level, I'm going to get it back up to GitHub. Now, initially, over on the source control tab in VS Code, I can see there's all these changes. So there's multiple steps to getting those changes back up. The first is to tell version control we care about these. So if I hover over changes, right, there's also discard. I can throw away all the work I've just done, so don't click that button. I'm going to say stage all changes. That is the equivalent of git add -a. Now, I've got this little npm thing running here. I can open a new terminal so that we're still in the same thing. And now I've got like a whole bunch of terminals opening potentially, right? Because I've got that one in the background, which is actually running the little server. But then I need another one so I can work on Git. So git add -a, which is the equivalent of staging the change in the UI there. Then git commit m, ready to go. Right? That is going to commit the change. So I can't just delete it and lose it forever. Yeah, I could do it via VS Code, or I could do it in the GitHub desktop. These are all three equivalent. All right, so over here, I could say Drew is ready to go and hit commit. And that is the equivalent of this message. Now, it's not on GitHub. If I go to GitHub and I go to DrewCart, there's nothing there. So I've just told my local copy that I care about these files and that I've placed a human name as to what the change of these files all collectively is. So now git push origin, and in this case is called main. For some of you might be master. It could be whatever. That is the branch that you are on. Push that up. And now when I refresh over here, view code, and I've got my assets over here. Okay. So now last step, getting it working on Vercel. This should look like the top level of the repo. Okay. There should not be like a nested folder of DrewCard. So if I had a thing within that, just take those files and get them up one level so that they're at the top of the repo. You could get it working without that, as I'll show Bryce's example, but it's here. All right. Now I'm going to go and open a window to Vercel. I'm going to do add new project. And the reason for this, you're working in version control over here on GitHub. It's just you working with your code. Vercel comes along and is leeching onto that to build a project. So they're two separate spaces here. Okay. Now, this is saying import your Git repo. Import. Yay. All right. We're most of the way done. But if I go to build and output, I need to check the output directory. And this is dist or public. We'll see which. Now, the reason that I know that this output directory is what it is, if I go in here, right, let's hit explore so we can see what happens. In the initial commands, you had to check build. And what the build command gives us is npm run build. Cannot find module es build. Oh, well, that's embarrassing. Let's do npm install again. Just to make sure. Cannot find module es build. Copy. Oh, it also says there's some auditing. All right, let's open WC es build not found. Building. See a subpage overview. Roll up project generator. Input. npmjs.com. Search package es build. Okay, es build lives there. I don't know why mine does not have es build built in. Let's check in a standalone terminal just to invalidate that. Run build. Sure enough, it says it does not have it. All right, so I'm going to do npm install -- save es build. Let's see if this gets it. Otherwise, the end of this video ends in a shockingly broken state. npm run build. There we go. I don't know why I had to add that. I'll be perfectly honest. Let's open back up the VS Code. We can see package.json did not have ESBuild as a requirement here. That's kind of weird. So we saw how to fix that right there. Right, so as an initial debugging step, you run an npm command. There's an error of some kind, right? I'm going back up to where I ran the command and looking, right? And it says cannot find module. Now, when we're running commands in the terminal, we're talking backend, packages, development. The likelihood that I can just copy and paste this into npmjs.com and find that it exists and then install it in this case, and now it works, is pretty high. Now, I don't know why that wasn't installed, to be perfectly honest, in my initial installation that I did, but I had a way of solving it right there. So it's giving us the error to at least put us in the neighborhood of what the problem might be. In this case, whatever version of rollup is not calling this thing called ESBuild. And if you don't know what the word rollup is, congratulations. This is the space. Now I go and Google rollup. Rollup is a way of bundling this stuff together. I am aware of what it is. It's similar to Webpack. But when I did a build, and if I look at my source, the only things that change are package.json and package lock. Package lock is an interpretation of all the different files that need to be found across all the different things to make this work. But now, because I had that save flag, right, I did npm install -- save. That saves ESBuild in here. That is critical because if an automated thing is going to run our code, it has to have those dependencies in place. So I'm going to stage these changes and do ESBuild was missing, LOL, commit. All right, and now that stuff is in version control so that I can hit sync change right there. I didn't notice that was there. So I can push that back up to my repo. Okay, so we solved that issue, but the thing we were actually looking for is dist. So we're building out what this thing is. That is not what gets shipped to end users, okay? So this minified this file, smashed everything into one line, and then whenever there's a JS reference, .js, here we go, it created what's called a bundle. So you don't ship the file name as it is, or most people don't. I do actually, but in this case, we're not. You're letting something else, in this case, rollup, analyze your code, find the JavaScript you use, and then it spiders through all the code that those things use and smashes it all into one file that is only the things required for that to work. So you get a bunch of minified gobbledygook. Now, in here, it's going to be your code and lit element in this case, which lit's pretty small, and anything lit element depends on, which it doesn't depend on much because it's vanilla. So if I were to open the containing folder for this, we can see that the file that people access to load our web page is 1.9 kilobytes. And then the file that has the code and dependencies for all of the stuff to load, in this case, is 17.7 kilobytes. So I'm going to be shipping someone roughly 19 kilobytes, and then there's some of this other stuff, and obviously there's Doughty. So dist is not actually put up in version control. If we look in git ignore, we can see that /dist and _site, out, tc, some common names. Those are all ignored in this file. So is node modules. You should not have node modules up on GitHub. So I've got this up there. It pushes to an output directory called dist. Now, looking at the configuration for Vercel, here's how Vercel works. Whenever you push code, it's listening on that webhook. So GitHub notifies Vercel, hey, there was a change. Then Vercel creates a container, which is just a virtual play space thing that is secure in a secure context. And then it runs npm install, and then it runs npm run build. And then it looks for the files in dist, copies them, and statically serves them. So I'm going to deploy this dist directory in this case. So it's going to take DrewCard, and hopefully this just works. Otherwise, that would be very embarrassing because I have to debug something. So while it's building, you can actually watch it do this, right? So it's going to go through, and it's grabbing all the dependencies via npm install. In this case, it's saying, hey, there's a lock file that is out of date, which how could be out of date? I just pushed it up like 2 seconds ago, but I mean, it's possible. Right? It's going to throw some deprecating notices. Anything in this orange text here, we don't really care about. These are just statuses as well, right? That downloaded 830 packages in 31 seconds. Then it ran build, and it's already done. So these ones should build pretty darn quickly. Now I can go to DrewCard, right? And if I right-click and inspect, this is now something all of you can mess with and see how this ends up working. I've got a wrapper, container, all that fun stuff. It knew to grab this asset that is the JPEG, right? But if I look at network, and let's do a refresh, Control R. I've got disable cache, so I get fresh copies every time. Actually, let's do Control Shift R. That is fragging the local cache. It's almost like a cache clear. We can see the app is 921 bytes. It's even smaller than what I said it was going to be. And this file is 7.1K. So even though the underlying resource is 17.7K, it was able to compress it for transfer, right? So imagine it's kind of like zipping a folder. It's G-zipping, or I'm not actually sure the compression algorithm they use, probably Brotli. There's different ways you can send the data over the wire to get it there faster, right? So if I inspect it, you'll see a bunch of nonsense, other than maybe right towards the end, right? You'll see in this case, DrewCard, right? But it doesn't even have the class name of Drew, right? It's to save data over the wire. It's even taking class DrewCard, extends lit element, and it's remapping lit element to be X and DrewCard to be BT. Now, if it detected something used the class DrewCard, it's going to then spider and rewrite that to not say DrewCard. It's going to say BT. This is how intelligent these bundlers are. So roll up Webpack, this kind of magic behind the scenes, is running to make this happen. Now, some of you mentioned when you were doing the React one that it was running crazy slow. And that's because it's on Webpack and it's got a lot of legacy implications as far as assembling these. And hopefully, when you get this all up and going, you don't have those issues in the same regard. So I hope this was beneficial. I'm going to post this as part of class so you have access to it. I'll give you a link to the repo and my DrewCard. We'll look through it a bit in class today. But we're going to keep building upon this element. We're going to work on notions of abstraction, naming convention, all the nitty-gritty details so that this is a repurposable item, because this is what Project One ultimately is taking this card, publishing it to NPM so it's repurposable. And by publishing to NPM, I mean there are all kind of other web components. In fact, all of the web components that my team makes live out. I don't think it likes the way I spelled that. Oh, there we go. Okay. I just didn't autocomplete. There's so many. Live out on NPM. So we're going to get you from where we are now through this package being published out on NPM and reusing in another repository. This is where we'll go prior to spring break. All right. See you in class.